Oh, no.
You're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
Don't be a smartass.
Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But
Do you think they'll make him cry in this?
you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him. Hello there. I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker.
Wait, can I get a little tea? Can I, wait.
And today I'm
Can
surrounded
we enjoy a smidge of elder abuse? Is that
by
okay?
25 atheists.
Just a smidge.
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Wow, we're 2016. We're so back. Oh my God. We just did like a decade cycle. We're in 2015. Next year, we'll be back fully in the 2016 Gamergate era. We're bringing atheists back in a big way.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to
By the way, they had to change the thumbnail and the title originally said 1 Christian versus 20 atheists because of that opening. No way.
become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics. Like, I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So
And
there's
so-
always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
Then it seems kind of like this no.
What an amazing thesis to try and defend. Just anytime someone says, hey, I engaged with all these things and I don't feel like I missed out on a lot because I experienced it and now I reject it. Well, maybe your goals were wrong. I don't know. I don't know anything. I'm just telling you that you might be rejecting something that you don't know.
No true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheist claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but my experience with atheists is twofold. Is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like 3 people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start
Wait, good
with
reply?
your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other. The mere fact of communication.
Huh? That's not
presumes
true. Wait, what? That's not true.
Commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized.
So for this entire discussion, I'm resisting the urge to call it sidestepping because it feels like each of them is bringing up a separate point to try and highlight something new. But then as soon as they bring up this like analogy or they bring up this tangent that they want to bring it back to the original conversation, the other person does the same thing. So Jordan Peterson gets asked a question, and instead of responding to the question directly, he says, okay, wait, before we can get to that, what is your definition of God? Which then is defined. But then before we can get an answer to this, like we can go back, they start taking issues with the definition, even though this would be way faster if Jordan Peterson was willing to even suggest a definition for God. And it's just this over and over again.
In the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Okay,
now, Moses
this one's going to make
is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible
It's
interpretation.
the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Well, not obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim
I'm
is
saying that we
he's
can't
good.
know because we can't talk to those authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
and we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could.
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say. I said
That is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like...
Okay, wait. They're going into another topic again. The problem is what he said, from my understanding, was very surface level. It was, well, here's this example in the Bible. Which, if you're an atheist, you already at least partly believe that the Bible's fiction, that it was written by not all atheists, etc., but that it was a work that was put together by just some dudes. It was not ordained by God. It's the equivalent of like the Lord of the Rings. Some guy made it, or a couple guys made it, right? It doesn't have any unique significance there. So he's saying, hey, well, there's this story in the Bible where Moses is given the opportunity to realize the unknown unknowns. And that's proof that you don't understand what you're rejecting. But if you're referencing the thing that somebody says they don't believe in, I don't think that that's a very good way to convince anyone, bystanders even, that atheists don't understand what they're rejecting.
Yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. To help especially the audience kind of like boil this down, there was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No,
Is that...
I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a problem
Let's
with...
pause there. Sorry.
Wow, what a waste of fucking time.
Been voted out by
Awesome.
the majority.
Hey, how's it going? Nice
How
to meet you.
doing? Nice to meet you, too.
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
Shaky argument, because you Jordan Peterson bringing up rejecting is an active rejection rather than a passive rejection, right? If you don't know about the deity Lono, your rejection of it is passive, not active, but we'll see.
I'm not rejecting it. No more than I'm rejecting
believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know anything about.
Do you believe in Lono?
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that
Oh,
that's...
dude, you're getting owned by Peterson, dude. No. Yeah, the one argument is saying that it's by being monotheistic, you actively are rejecting every other deity. No. I mean, yes. That's a better start, I think. Well, maybe you can still pivot this part, though. Because he can pivot into, yeah, but you understand that by refocusing on monotheism versus polytheism.
valid, then there's no point in...
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't
Do
mean
you
it's
believe-
formulated accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists? Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your
Answer that
argument
question.
to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your
I didn't
claim.
say that I rejected the belief in Lona. I
It's-
said
it's
I didn't
Lono.
know who Lono was. I didn't say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't, but let me get to my even greater point. You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion. I have a degree in religious studies, specialty in Christianity and Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
This is true, actually.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
No, that's not why. What the fuck? That's the reason that atheists tend to be more well read on religions is because they're skeptical by nature. This is a broad stroke. Just stay with me for a second. Whether skepticism is some more innate quality, or whether it's not relevant. That's not the point that I'm trying to make. But your religion that you are born into requires blind faith, right? A lot of atheists, especially ones who grew up in very religious households, when attempting to question religions or when attempting to question the figures in their life that had authority and getting very unsatisfying answers, they were then forced to go and sit there and do a bunch of research, right? Whereas religion requires that you give blind faith. That you just believe, and that is pious of you, right? So you don't need to sit there and read everything and find, if anything, reading the Quran, reading the Bible, reading whatever literature associated with your religion of choice might worsen your ability to have faith.
Okay. You can...
They're concerned with deep matters, and one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definitional.
Right, but they also have to identify with a religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along with that.
Well, that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious, but accept that they're spiritual.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
Ms. Chatter said, as a priest, I'm going to disagree. Religion requires the ability to seek better questions and not answers. Yeah, but that's like, because in this context, you would be a based priest, right? This is kind of like being an authority on a topic or a subject is different from being a believer of that topic or subject, right? So like capitalists that you run into in the wild, or people who want to believe in capitalism, but are not capital owners, if you try and push them on any economic theory, and you try and talk to them about Marxism, they will very emotionally disagree and say, you just want to send us into breadline communism. Now, if you talk to an economist about the issues of capitalism, and they are a capitalist, they can argue them, or they can argue their positions, or maybe even your positions, or maybe even agree with your positions, but they understand that the system might benefit themselves. I'm not saying that in the situation with like a priest, that the system would benefit yourself, but as a priest, you're expected to have answers for other people. So you should be well-read. If you are just a random believer and suddenly your fucking mouthy kids start asking you a bunch of questions, but you don't have the answers to them, a lot of people's response to that is just to say, this is heresy. You should believe. You should have faith in God, right?
Aha! Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
What's your name?
I'm Greg, nice to meet you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that
he's cooking. Wait, he's cooking?
To this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
what literal way?
The way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that question?
Well,
that was a great answer. Oh my God. Wait, this guy cooked, he fried, he boiled, he baked. Whoa. He just said you're using two definitions of the word reject within the same sentence, which is unfair. If I say a painting is emotionally moving, I don't think that the painting is literally moving. If I'm in a car that's moving, I might say I'm moving. These are two, in the context that they're being used in, are accurate definitions of moving. And you're doing the same thing with rejecting. When people are rejecting God, they aren't rejecting all these other things that you're suggesting. They're rejecting this idea of this omnipotent being that sent his son down and did all these other miracles and whatever. We're rejecting that principle. We're rejecting these ideas right here. We're rejecting a more literal Abrahamic God that we think of. That's the most popular right now. That's what we're rejecting, right? And you're trying to say that, well, you're rejecting that and you don't know that you're rejecting all this other stuff, but that's a separate sentence. That's a separate point, right? I think atheists understand what they're rejecting. They're rejecting this notion of God because they find it absurd. They don't find it realistic, whatever reason you have for being an atheist. And if you want to suggest, oh my God, that atheists are losing out because they don't understand that they are rejecting all these other things as well, you make that argument separately. But to like talk down to atheists as if they're children, being like, well, you just don't understand. Those are two different. Anyways, you're being intentionally obtuse and no, I don't mean a triangle. Yeah.
Scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or that there are multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
No. Okay, no, sorry, that's not my... Maybe the science bros I talk to are different. The science bros that I've spoken to, their perspective seems to be, it's interesting. And it might be helpful. Here are some ideas we've had about what are the underlying principles behind the physics of our universe, as if it's an engine. I wonder if there's something more grand about it. Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be interesting? Let's try and figure it out.
In a sense, yeah, like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides...
Jordan! Mr. Peterson! You are a fantastic moron. Hey, can you try and connect whatever the fuck you're talking about here, this like theory of unity? Could you connect it to the prompt? I'm trying to connect it to that atheists don't. Here's a question for you.
Guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true.
Wait, repeat that. I missed half of it because I paused in the middle of it.
Atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Wait, this guy is getting his ass. Oh my God. Who is this? Who is he? Wait.
Okay. You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No,
There's nothing uncomfortable about the question. The question is like, what? Not quite why do you think you're right, but how do you determine that you're right? What do you think guides you in your determination
of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
It's a question that doesn't, I mean, maybe it does go somewhere. With Jordan Peterson, generally, no. That Elon, dude, if you want to see a terrible conversation, go watch the Jordan Peterson Elon Musk conversation. That one was fucking brutal. I think that his brain got a little fried by all the Xanax he took. By all the benzos. I think he just got a little bit fried. And then there was the carnivore diet, and then he had like some apple cider vinegar and he almost died. I think his brain is just like, it's like scrambled. He used to be a little bit more salient. I think he was still wrong, but he used to be more salient back before the carnivore diet and before the benzos. But now it's not so much. Now he's wrong and not cogent. Like this is I'm trying to think, where would this question go that would be helpful or useful? What guides you in your determination of whether or not you're saying it to me is true? Like, is the answer not always here, like scrutiny? If you think something is true, you take this theory that you believe in, you put it up to as many tests as you can, and so long as it continues being true, you can continue believing in it, right? If you're a capitalist and you believe in capitalism, in an ideal world, you would put it up to as many tests as you can, compare it to all of the opposing points of view, and then you would eventually stop believing in it because you would say, wait, it fails all of these important tests. Is that not like the same? Shouldn't what guide you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true? Shouldn't that always just be, I have yet to see a counter argument that's disproven it?
I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked
All
you a
right.
very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could
I
imagine
infer, right? I can infer. I can.
from what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that
Okay.
reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and
and
wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved
Please hit him with the golden rule, dude. I don't know why nobody ever quotes this to God believers.
capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten. But then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason.
Do you think that people can differ in
That's
their
pretty good.
response to something empathically?
Yeah. Like,
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see this is kind of goes back to what I'm saying initially.
I'm
where,
not defining it. Elijah
okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah, too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined
it.
it that
As
way.
I'm sure you know many people who've defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm just pointing out to you
Got
how
it.
God is defined in the Old Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of the
I'm
Mona
defining
Lisa.
God as conscience.
Okay. So that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
No, colloquially, when you say you don't believe in God, you're not saying you don't believe in a conscience. To respond to someone who says, I don't believe in God, and then you do this like very roundabout, which in Jordan Peterson's defense, he did get somewhere with it eventually, to then say, well, here in the Bible, it's described this way, and by these people, it's described this way. Okay, so that's not what people mean when they say that they don't believe in God, right? Rejecting God doesn't magically mean that you reject your conscience.
Okay,
In
so
Elijah and in Jonah.
sure. So whoever, so
It's
some.
not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay.
major
All right.
Old Testament
All right.
prophets.
All
Right?
right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
And then it's back to the guy's first point, though. They're fundamentally discussing different things. Yeah.
So it's
So-
not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. You accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because again,
I asked you if you believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand.
Oh my God, dude, this guy is mogging the shit out of Peterson.
Understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not in the least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you hypothetically disbelieve in.
It's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant.
Which it then goes back initially to this guy's first point, which is that he's being intentionally obtuse, that he is the one that is failing to understand what atheists are rejecting.
To the way that people tend to use these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't
ideas
make that
of God.
point, you did.
I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
All right. Oh,
That was brutal, dude. That was brutal. I just want to see what these other ones are. One sec. Morality and purpose can't be found within science. Wrong. Disagree. You can find explanations for them in science. Evolutionarily, it is beneficial for human beings to be empathetic creatures and to be purpose-driven creatures. We're hardwired to not like boredom because boredom is not beneficial for our survival. So you can find the answers through science, but the science suggests that they are innate in us as a biological like imperative of sorts. Everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they, I think it says, might not know it. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, like, I think we all like worship certain ideals. I don't think we worship things or people or objects necessarily, but we worship like ideals, right? Like I worship the ideal of like humanist, empathetic driven, not perspectives, but policies, right? I worship the ideals of like, yeah, kindness, justice, empathy. Exactly. So that would be, I wouldn't be disagreeing with the prompt, although I'd probably still be disagreeing with Jordan Peterson. Atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religious foundation. What does it say? But deny its foundational stories. Huh? This is such a Western-centric perspective. Holy shit. Just ignore the entire continent of Asia. What the hell? Just ignore every country that doesn't have predominantly Christianity embedded in it. Like, what the fuck? This is such a, like, the presupposing that Christianity has always been there in every part of the world is already incorrect, right? I guess you could argue that he's only talking about atheists that grew up within Christianity or even Abrahamic religions, but still, that's a big if. Also, just because... Also, wait, this isn't even accurate either. So, first of all, if it was coincidental that atheists agree with the morality in the Bible, that doesn't mean that they're inherent... Those morals are inherent to the Bible. Otherwise, other countries wouldn't have people who were empathetic. So the foundational stories are irrelevant. And then let's see. Atheists claim Jordan Peterson's framework for understanding Christianity is probably not the one that the Bible intended. Oh, that is, I don't even want to. That one's giving like, it's him with the water bottle saying there's like God everywhere you look or something like that. You guys know that one. Okay, that's enough of that. I just wanted to take a little peek in there. Good to see that he got fucking schooled, dude. Oh, Jesus. Please comment. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Please like the video. Times 100. Please do that. It takes 2 seconds.